I was feeling, it's okay. I was feeling comfortable up there because I was sitting with all my friends, and then they got up and left, and I was sitting there all by myself. But I am so happy to be a part of this organization, and as I've been here just today, and I've seen just a glimpse, just the very top of the amount of logistical support and organization that it's taken to bring this to Dallas, and also the tremendous support that came out of Dallas. Does it work? Can you hear? Ah. Is this one better? Okay. I feel like Donnie and Marie. But for the people who hung the art, for the great artists who came, especially for the Coco family that's here, did you know it's his 58th wedding anniversary, he and his wife there? So congratulations. But especially to Richard and Glenn and all the people who put this idea together and that we are in the middle of it. I'm not artistic in any way. So I want to speak to those of us who love art but don't feel like we can create it. And I thought I would just be part of that today. Thank you for giving me such a warm reception and for the love that I feel in Dallas. Dallas is a tremendous strength in the church. When we talk about the strength and the places where the church really thrives and grows and is woven into the community in a great way, I saw that today when I was at the refugee agencies, and how much the small things that you do, the small support of a project or a volunteerism or working on Just Serve, or the way that you work with your neighbors and in the schools and the people that you work with, that makes a difference because of the respect that people have for our faith and for you. So I got a chance to see a little bit about that today. So I'm very glad that Elder Jones is here supporting them. I'm thankful that the Elder President and Sister Chapman are here as mission leaders and the rest of the support of the church leaders. Can I just ask, because of the great exhibit for female Latter-day Saint artists, if you've served in a Relief Society presidency, would you just stand up in this room? Aren't you proud of our artists in there, our sisters? They are us and we are them, so thank you. Look at all of you, this is wonderful. You know, I told Elder Jones, I never write out what I'm going to say, and so it's always going to be a surprise to you and to me, so hopefully it goes okay. I read a quote by he's not super well known, but he's a California watercolorist, and he said this. He said, first, one seeks to become an artist by training the hand. Then one finds it is the eye that needs improving. Later, one learns it is the mind that wants developing, only to find that the ultimate quest of the artist is in the spirit. And I wanted to take this and use it as a frame today to talk about some of the things that I decided. And mostly I'm going to tell a bunch of stories. I hope one thing in one of those stories will be useful to you. So the first one is, one seeks to become an artist by training the hand. And I want to start off by telling a very well-known Old Testament story. You know the story. It's the story of Joseph of Egypt. He's one of the younger sons, 12 brothers, probably some sisters. His father's favorite, don't know why, but anyway. And his brothers just torment him over it. I mean, they're just so annoyed by all of the things that Joseph is and does. But as they're out, and about doing their work, somebody gets the brave idea, let's sell him. Let's sell him to one of those slave traders that are coming along. So they dig a pit. They were going to leave him there. And in the end, they decide, let's make a little money off of Joseph. And they sell him off. And those slave traders take him far away into Egypt. And if you are Joseph, this is so unfair, what has happened to you. Imagine your mind trying to readjust. I'm sure he wasn't treated well by the slave traders. I'm sure he was put up in auction, and some guy named Potiphar buys him and puts him to work in the house. And if you're Joseph trying to adjust to the expectations of that were your life, you thought you would be your father's heir, you would have a birthright, you would grow up and marry somebody in the Abrahamic covenant because that's important in your family. You would be part of the family business. You would worship the living God. And suddenly, none of that is possible because you are a slave in Egypt and nobody cares about any of that. Nobody cares who you are. And he's working in a place he doesn't understand the language. The culture is very foreign to him. If this were you, what would you do? It's so easy to rail against that this is not what I expected. This is so unfair. This is not right. This is not what I was born for. But Joseph at some point makes a decision. Okay, I guess I'll try and be the best slave possible. So he does. He starts trying to learn about his environment. He starts learning the language. He learns about Potiphar's business so that he can help his master's business prosper. And he does. His business prospers, and soon he becomes very, very trusted in the household until Potiphar's wife makes a play for Joseph. And of course, he flees with his integrity, and she takes her revenge, and now he's in prison. And everything that he worked for is gone. It's lost. He's starting completely over because now he's not a slave, now he's a prisoner. But his philosophy comes back to him, and he says, okay, I guess I'll try to be the best prisoner there is. So he starts helping the other prisoners. He starts giving advice to the jailer, and he becomes the best prisoner that can be. Well, eventually, it takes years, but one of those prisoners remembered that Joseph can interpret dreams. And the Pharaoh has had a dream, and no one can interpret it. And, oh yeah, that guy I knew in prison. And they send for Joseph, and he interprets Pharaoh's dream. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh, weirdly, makes him second in command. So if you're keeping track of Joseph's life, it's one big yo-yo, back and forth. But now he is second in command, in charge of preparing the entire nation for these 7 years of leanness that will come, which he does. Part of his elevation to this second part, and she's one of the heroes, he's given a wife. Anybody know her name? Asenath. Her father was a priest of On. She was one of the worshipers in the temple of On. She's not an Israelite. She doesn't worship the living God. Joseph doesn't get to choose who's married. He gets Asenath. But do you think they were happy? There's no evidence, but I think they were happy. I think she's one of the great heroes of this. And partly I believe that, and that she came to worship the living God because for those of us who are descended through Ephraim and Manasseh, those are their sons. And she is our mother. She is the foremother of anyone who's ever been a convert, who's ever come in from a different culture, who's ever had to worship the strange living God out of the desert that you didn't grow up with. She's our mother. And I'm so grateful that along with Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah, there's Asenath. And we remember her as one of our matriarchs, and I'm very thankful for her. Well, you know the story. The 7 years of plenty go by. The second year of the lean times comes. It's the second year. And who comes to buy corn? His 11 brothers, 10 brothers. And they don't recognize Joseph. He's there in the linen of an Egyptian prince, but he recognizes them. And what would you do? Joseph does a beautiful thing because he forgives. In that moment, he forgives those brothers. I don't know what it took. I don't know if it was hard or easy, but he did it. And he covered over the wounds, the physical wounds and the emotional wounds of being betrayed by his own brothers that he looked up to. And he covered those over with something strong, and he forgave them, and he saved his father's house. Now that's a type for Jesus Christ. And it reminds me, I'm not pushing my buttons. There's the picture of Joseph with his brothers kneeling before him. But it reminds me of this. Does anybody know what that Japanese art is called? What is it? Yes, kintsugi. And so it is the art of when a piece of valuable pottery breaks, you take all of the shards and you glue them back together, and then you overlay the scars with gold. And if it's done well, it makes a new pattern. And the broken pieces become actually more valuable afterward. So this, I really love this. We worship perfection. But this is something that's different. This is a kind of beauty that says perfection is one thing, but this is brokenness that has been mended, and it's more valuable than perfection. Another type of Jesus Christ and another type of art that celebrates our human experience, because we are all broken. And we get to have the chance, like Joseph, to overlay our scars with the gold of forgiveness, the gold of gospel, the gold of trying to be like Jesus Christ. And it makes us stronger, and it makes us more valuable. So, did you love those? I just love those. If it's done well, if the eye of the artist can look at that crack and actually incorporate it with their eye into a new design, it becomes even more valuable. So the second part of the quote, then one finds it is the eye that needs improving. The artists that practice this Japanese art, look at this. They actually have incorporated the crack into a new design, and I love that too. I'm probably not the only person in this room who's had eye surgery. So I had eye surgery so that one eye sees far away and the other eye sees close. And you know this about your eyes. They actually see two different things. This sees a circle and this sees a circle, and it comes into your brain, and your brain melds those images into one image, one circle. So when I had the surgery done, this eye, I can look out there and everything is sharp. This eye, everything is blurry, and my brain takes that and puts it together in the big circle, and half the particles are blurry and half the particles are sharp, and it gives me the worst headache. But the doctor, the ophthalmologist, he said, if you'll be patient, your brain will sort that out, and what your brain will do is it will subtract everything in there that's blurry, and it will only pay attention to the things that are sharp. And I thought, sure, that will happen. Because for 6 weeks, I couldn't read my email, I couldn't look at my phone, I couldn't drive. And I thought, what if it never happens? What if I'm one of the people that it will never happen to? But it did. I look out at you, and my brain does not see. It's like a screen door, and it just looks right through the screen, and it doesn't see that cross-hatching. Well, our brains are like this also. Our brains are listening to a very sophisticated discussion about art. But there's another part of our brain that's saying, why does her hair look that way? Do general officers have to wear a coat? It's so hot in here. Listen to her Utah accent. I mean, you know the whole thing. It goes on and on and on. This is how we are. But the artists among us are able to filter that stuff out. We can't help it. We're going to hear it. It's going to happen. We notice. But if we can not focus on that and instead look at who people really are, that's an art of seeing that I would like to cultivate in myself. And maybe some of you are very good at it. I bet you know people who are very good at it. You might not think it's an art, but think how it makes you feel when you know somebody who does not pay any attention to all the blurry parts of you, but they love the sharp, strong parts of you. That's a wonderful gift. I'll show you this. It's Michelangelo's David. It's probably a well-known story. I just read a big article in the New York Times Magazine about this. But it started off by saying in 1464, the city wanted to have this beautiful image. So they sent somebody, I'll tell you his name, who was a sculptor himself, and he went to the Carrara marble fields, and his job was to pick something that would be great. His name is Agostino Di Duccio. Did you love that? Di Duccio. He has no experience doing something this big. Actually, nobody did. But the piece that he chose was flawed. In the marble fields, the piece that he chose, it had little tiny holes in it, and it had veins in it that were not favored for a big, large. They want something epic. They want it to be huge. Also, when he rough cut it, he made it too narrow. So when he finally, and it took 2 years to bring it from the marble fields into Florence by ocean boat and by barge, and it fell into a ditch, and it got sucked in the mud, and they had to pull it out. It took 2 years. Finally, they get it there, and the city fathers, the people who knew about sculpture more than Agostino, they said, this is a disaster. This piece won't work. It's flawed in multiple ways, and we've made a terrible mistake. This guy was over his head, and we don't know what to do. So they take this giant piece of stone, and they lay it on its side out in the back of the town square, and it sits there because nobody knows what to do with it. And it sits there, and it sits there for like 35 years. Well, if you know about stone, it's drying out in the sun. They call it, that stone has now been cooked because now it's very, very brittle. It's been rained on, the sun has baked it, the birds have pooped all over it. It's a mess. And then in like 1501, the city fathers say, we gotta do something about that stone. What could we do? Who could do something with it? And they try to think of a genius. If it's 1500, who do you think of? Da Vinci, Leonardo da Vinci. He could do something with this. It's cooked, but maybe a genius could do something. And da Vinci said, I'm not doing any sculpture. So now what do? Well, there's this young 26-year-old artist named Michelangelo, and he's just done this fabulous piece called the Pietà in Rome, and this Florence is his hometown. So they say, maybe we could get him. And if it doesn't work out, nobody knows him anyway. He's interested because it's his home. So he comes. He looks at that block, and he said, okay, I'll take it. I'm going to do it. But I require that you build a shed around this because I don't want anyone watching me work. So they build a 15-foot-high wooden shed that doesn't have a roof on it, and he works in there for 2 years. And when it's revealed, when it comes down, instead of a cooked piece of stone, they see this spectacular nude man that is a perfection masterpiece. And the reason it worked, the reason it is the way it is because Michelangelo understood the stone. It was narrower because it was cut wrong. It was narrower in the middle. And he figured out the grain. He figured out how to make it. So rather than this over-muscled thing that you would see, you see this lean, twisted figure that is perfectly balanced. And I love that Michelangelo had the eye to be able to see through what most people would say is an unworkable, imperfect piece of stone, disaster, cooked, unusable. And instead, he sees this. That ability to see through all of the imperfections is a divine piece of, it's a divine artistry. And we don't have to be good at sculpting to practice that art. All of us can practice something like that. You know, in the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus has that beautiful teaching about seeing. And he says, the light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. It took my eye surgery for me to really understand what that means. My eye would be single. And I appreciate all of that. So the third part of the quote is, later one learns that it is the mind that wants developing. I think about developing my mind, not just my hands to be skilled or my eye to see things, but to process what's important about this. What's the priority? What is the message that nobody has received yet, but that is there? Today is an important anniversary for me. It's February 7th, 2020. And exactly 9 years ago today, I was in Damascus, Syria, and Aleppo, Syria, working on a humanitarian project. I was the regional director of Latter-day Saint Charities, and so I covered the countries in the Middle East. And we had two really important projects going on in Syria. One of them was we were working with the University of Damascus to improve their dairy herd. So this girl from Bountiful, Utah is on the phone ordering bull semen from Canada to be shipped to Syria with a Department of Commerce license to improve their dairy herd. And no, I didn't know anything about that earlier. But this is me working with the agriculture professors, and we're talking about how it's going, how the strains are improving, and what Damascus is, and the university is learning, and the students that were there. The other project was taking place up in Aleppo, which is the second largest city. And at the university that it houses 200,000 students. It's an ancient university, and it's enormous. We were working with their medical school to train birth attendants, midwives, doctors that deliver babies on resuscitation techniques. In other words, how to make sure that the baby survives and the mother survives. So we were working with them on this project. I went up there to look at the dormitories where our training doctors would come and train a corps of Syrian doctors and nurses that would then go out as trainers throughout the whole country. And it will take 7 or 8 years, but they were going to train everybody. And then we would see infant mortality rates recover. So these were the 2 projects that I was working on. February 7th, 2011. Church security calls me that day, and they said, you know, there's supposed to be some demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, but why don't you just get out of Damascus? So I got on a city bus with the humanitarian missionaries that were with me, and we went 3 hours south to a place called Basra, which is, there's an old Roman ruin there. And we walked through that Roman ruin, and it can be flooded so that they can actually put boats out on there on the stage. So we sat in the amphitheater, and it had rained, and we could imagine what it was like to watch battle scenes being reenacted. There was a cute little 9-year-old boy who, his name was Mustafa, and he took us around. He wanted to show us everything in his little bit of English. And then he said, oh, I know a very good place to eat, very, very good, very cheap. It's my brother's place. So we had orange Fanta and shawarma at the brother's place, and we just sat around talking. There were some boys on motorcycles that were sort of spinning around, and this guy from Bear Lake, Utah, this missionary, he goes, I want to try your motorcycle. And so they let him get on it, and he's got a stocking cap and a big trench coat, and he's zooming around, and those little Syrian boys thought he was so fun. This was the day. My trip ended, and I came home. But those demonstrations got more and more people involved, and they were still peaceful, but the government took exception to them, and they started shooting people in the demonstrations, and from that, the Syrian War started. So by April, Elder Holland had called me on the phone and said, where's our couple in Syria? What are they doing right now? And I said, well, I think they're home. I'll call them and see. He says, let's get them on a plane right now. So they got on a plane and flew out about 3 hours before the airport closed. How did Elder Holland know that? I don't know. Nobody else had left yet, but that couple left. That was 9 years ago today that I was there. So these are some of the places that I've been. When I drove from Damascus to Aleppo, we went through the city of Homs. And I don't know if you can see that, but it's a suburban middle-class street. But this is what that street looks like 3 years later in 2014. We see this on the news, and it's so hard to imagine. Well, it's just the Middle East. It's just the Middle East blowing up. But I have a personal connection there, and I've been on those kinds of streets. And when I see that kind of destruction, I think that could be my neighborhood. That would be what my street looks like. This is one of the hospitals where we stopped. It's big, it's modern. We talked about having that training there. This is what that hospital looks like now. Just a couple more. This is the Umayyad Mosque. It's one of the great national treasures. It was built by the Umayyad dynasty. That tower over there is called the Tower to Jesus. It's set aside for Jesus because Islam worships Jesus as a prophet. And I walked through that courtyard with a neonatologist who was quoting Nizar Qabbani poetry to me. So that he says, I want you to feel the beautiful Syrian poetry. And so he's quoting it to me as we walk across that. But this is what that mosque looks like now. And of course, the Tower to Jesus has been completely taken down. And just one more. This is a 9-year-old girl. This photo was snapped on her birthday in 2011. And this was that same girl in 2014. Our minds can hardly engage with this kind of difficulty. I show you this picture because this is Aleppo. This is the place just outside it where I was meeting at that university with all of those doctors. This kind of destruction is hard for us to imagine. But there are people in this room, multiple people in this room, that if this isn't physical destruction, if we're talking emotional destruction, this is what they're like on the inside. The things that have happened to them, just like Joseph, you can't wrap your mind about. This isn't what I expected. This isn't what I wanted. How do I adjust when my inner life looks like that? What do we do to give each other the comfort when we live in a world that produces that? One of the things that we can find is art. Art is a solace. Art is a comfort. And I can't read Nizar Kamani poetry without feeling what it felt like to be there. Now, I followed this war for 9 years, and my heart is just grieved. It's just one of many wars that are going on. How do we help each other recover when this has happened to us, either physically or emotionally? And there are people all around us who are in this situation. This is just a country that's in this situation. I didn't mean to get emotional myself. How many people watching The Crown? In this season this year, they talk about this Aberfan Welsh mining disaster in 1966. Did you watch this episode? So it's terrible. There's mining slag that has not been taken care of properly, and it liquefied. And as it just crept all of a sudden like an avalanche, only it's mining slag, and it hit the elementary school. And all of the little children in the elementary school were buried in mining slag. And their families just rushed to them. So of course I watch this on The Crown and I think, well, how much of that is true? So I get online and I start looking at it. This is an actual picture of the day in October 1966 when the families all had the funerals for those little children. Now, Prince Philip was there, as it showed in there, and he came back. Now, in the episode, I don't know if this is really true, he said he couldn't speak because it was such a difficult disaster for those families that nobody had any words. Nobody could use words to talk about how they felt and how bad it was. But at the funeral, up on top of the cemetery hill there, those Welsh people, music is so important to them, they stood up, and all together those parents sang the song, Jesus, Lover of My Soul, written by Charles Wesley. And he said, Prince Philip wrote in his own diary, not on the video, he said, the art, the music, the words that they sang were the inside of their souls, and it healed us. He said, I've never been any place like that. He was the representative to the funeral, where nobody had words, but the song expressed their hope. So I'll just read you the words. I know you know them. It says, Jesus, lover of my soul, let me to thy bosom fly, while the nearer waters roll, while the tempest still is high. Hide me, O my Savior, hide, till the storm of life is past, safe into the haven guide. O receive my soul at last. Art helped them persevere. It helps all of us persevere. And the art of persevering is one of the things that we can do with our lives that make it divine and make it holy. The last little phrase of this is only to find that the ultimate quest of the artist is in the spirit. The definition of a masterpiece is the person's most important work. And often it's one of a kind. And when there is one of a kind art, we treat it. It gets insured. It is transported with guards. It is enshrined in buildings that are themselves art. We charge money to see it. And yet each one of us is that unique, one of a kind. The life that we're living is the masterpiece. And the worst thing we can do with our masterpiece is compare it to somebody else. Because O'Keeffe isn't like Jasper Johns. And none of us is like any of the other ones. We're all very different. And if we remember that we ourselves are the masterpiece exactly because we're not like anybody else, it takes away the power, it takes away that desire to compare and feel guilty or bad that we're not like other people. The most harmful thing we can do to our art is to compare ourselves. And I'll just say this, it's from Sister Patricia Holland. The Lord uses us because of our unique personalities and differences, rather than in spite of them. He needs us all. Well, Jesus has the eye of a master, and he's good at finding masterpieces. And when he finds a masterpiece, especially if it's damaged, this is a painting that has just newly been restored. Jesus is a restorer of art. And for every single one of us, he uses his divine atonement to fill in the gaps, to restore the paint, to clear off the grime and the environmental pollution. He knows who we are underneath. He knows what we are meant to look like, and he helps us be restored in that way. I'm going to conclude by telling a story It's, again, well known. It's from the New Testament. You know this story, but I want to talk about a specific aspect of it. The first part of the story comes from Luke 10. It says, "Now it came to pass as they went that they entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about much serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her therefore that she help me. And Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her." So Jesus challenged Martha to kind of step out of her roles. She knew what her role was. Her role was to serve food and to be a hospitable host to these people who were in her home. She knew that. She knows her place. Jesus challenged her to get out of that place and step into the place that he had chosen for her. Well, what was the choice? What was the place that he had chosen for her? Mary is sitting at his feet, listening. She's acting like a disciple, and women are not disciples. And he invites her. He said, Mary, only one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that better part, and it won't be taken away from her. Now, if you see this, I don't know if you can see. This is Mary sitting at his feet, and clear over here in the shadows on the steps is Martha, standing in her place, doing the thing that she should with the water jug in her hand. But Jesus invites her to set down that water jug and come and be a disciple. Well, that goes against every bone that's in Martha's body. But he called her. He invited her. Now let me read out of John. This is John 11. "And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. But I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. And Jesus said unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. Martha saith unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? Now Martha could barely believe she was a disciple. But she's progressed since he was in her house during that time. And she makes an enormous leap out of whatever societal corner she was supposed to be in. She leaps into that place and she said, Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, who should come into the world. She's not just a disciple, she's a witness. This testament that she gives of Jesus, there's only one other person who gave a testimony like that. Do you know who it was? It's Peter. When he asked, Whom do you say that I am? He said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter and Martha are the bookend witnesses, the two people recorded that say, You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. People knew that. It was probably in their hearts as a testimony, but they are the New Testament witnesses. He called her to be a disciple, and he allowed her to be a witness. And she is one of those great witnesses. We've come, every single one of us tonight, because we have some connection to women, to faith, to art, to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I've tried to talk about the ways we put art in certain categories. Oh, it's music. Oh, it's painting. Oh, it's different things. But I believe that our lives are the masterpieces. And the art of the precious scars that we bear, especially when they've been mended with something as precious as gold, that's a kind of art. When we stand in our brokenness that's been mended because of Jesus Christ, that's an artistic statement, and it inspires others. The art of us seeing around or through imperfections is one of the great artistic divinities in this mortal earth, because this mortal earth is full of imperfections. The joy of it is to see if we can look beyond those to the 18-foot magnificent statue that's in there, but nobody else can see it. Can we be the ones? The art of persevering through tragedies and grief and unexpressible horror that is this life, knowing that it's temporary, knowing that we will rise again. The beauty of Brother Coco's piece in there, when it says, it is finished, and Jesus dies on the cross and raises up to meet his Father. Every one of us raises up out of our crucified hopes and dreams into something different. That's what this whole life means. And the art of making our unique selves into a masterpiece. We're masterpieces because we follow the Master. I just want to bear my testimony. Every person in here is an artist. Every one of us is building our masterpiece. We don't give ourselves enough credit. I wish that everybody had an art festival built to celebrate us, to celebrate the unique, wonderful things that we are. But can we do this for each other as a community of saints? Can we recognize the unique beauties that are in each one of us? Can we celebrate what we are to each other? Can we recognize when we've been broken and then mended how much more valuable we are to each other? This is my prayer. It's my hope. It's why I stay a member of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's why I'm a member of the church, because I gain these glories that are more important to me and more lasting than all of that destruction that happened in a war or in a cycle of abuse or in mental illness or anything else. The gospel of Jesus Christ lifts me so that I can persevere. Jesus Christ is everything to me, and I know he's everything to you. He's the core of everything we are, and he is the source of everything that we want. He asks us to do two things. He asks us to keep the two great commandments. Can you love God? Can you feel the compassion God has for you? And can you extend that compassion and deep connection to other people? That's all we have to do. Our masterpiece is how we do that back to the Lord. And we all do it in different ways. I bear my testimony. We are all divine. We are all pieces of art. We are all masterpieces. And may we acknowledge our destiny that isn't this earth, and we'll never fit into this earth because we're not destined for this earth. We are destined for something greater. And I bear my testimony that the power on the journey to go past where we are to the place where we want to be is in our Savior Jesus Christ. And I thank the artists that have helped show that way, to hold up that light sometimes when it's dark. I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.